There is a desolate, rocky ravine just outside the city of Bergen, Norway. It sits beneath the shadow of Mount Ulriken. The locals have known about it for centuries. The terrain is treacherous, choked with scree and loose rocks. Because of its dark history as a place where hikers disappeared and medieval travelers perished in the cold, it earned a grim nickname, Dødsdalen, the Valley of Death. On a freezing Sunday afternoon in November 1970, a father and his two young daughters were hiking through this forbidding landscape when they caught the scent of smoke. But it wasn't the smell of a campfire. It was the heavy, sickening stench of burning meat. When they followed the smoke to a secluded cluster of rocks, they found a nightmare. Lying on her back, her arms raised in the pugilistic stance of fire victims, was the charred body of a woman. But this was no ordinary tragedy. When the police arrived, they found a crime scene that defied all logic. The labels on all her clothing had been meticulously cut away. Identifying marks on her belongings had been scraped off, and in a locker at the local train station, detectives would soon find suitcases filled with wigs, non-prescription glasses, multiple currencies, and a notepad filled with encrypted military-grade codes. She was a ghost, a woman with 8 different identities, speaking broken English with a heavy accent, constantly changing hotel rooms, and moving like a shadow across Cold War Europe. Who was she? And who or what burned her alive in the Valley of Death?
Midnight Ledger Audio presents The Isdal Woman Mystery, the unidentified spy who died in Norway. Narrated by Bryan Midnight and conducted after hours of exhaustive research by Bryan Midnight. Chapter 1. The Valley of Death. November 29, 1970.
To understand the deepest, most baffling unsolved mystery in Norwegian history, we must start at the very end of her life. It was November 29, 1970, Bergen, Norway. The temperature hovered just above freezing. A local university professor and his 2 12-year-old daughters decided to take a hike in the Isdalen Valley. It was a rugged area, largely avoided by casual walkers due to the steep, rocky slopes. As they carefully navigated the scree, one of the daughters pointed to a smoldering fire among the rocks. When the father approached, the horrific reality set in. It was a human body, severely burned, particularly around the front of the torso, face, and thighs. The woman was lying on her back, her hands clenched into fists in front of her chest, a common physiological reaction to extreme heat causing the muscles to contract. The father immediately grabbed his daughters, rushed out of the valley, and contacted the Bergen police. When detectives arrived, they cordoned off the rocky ravine. What they found around the body immediately escalated the case from a tragic accident or suicide to something far more sinister and bizarre. Let's examine the forensic layout of the Isdalen crime scene. The body was positioned awkwardly among the rocks. Around her, neatly placed, were several items that had been spared the worst of the fire. There were 2 plastic bottles that smelled strongly of water and gasoline. There was a partially consumed bottle of St. Halvard liqueur. There were 2 plastic water bottles. There was a packed lunch, half eaten. And lying near the ashes was a silver spoon and the burnt remains of a passport. But it was what was missing that made the hair on the back of the detective's neck stand up. Every single identifying mark on the items had been purposefully removed. The labels on the plastic bottles were peeled off. The tags on the woman's clothing, her coat, her trousers, her undergarments, had all been meticulously snipped away with scissors. Even the branding on her umbrella was gone. Someone had gone to extreme, methodical lengths to ensure that absolutely nothing at this crime scene could be traced back to a manufacturer, a store, or a specific country. The police scoured the area. There were no tracks in the frost leading to her body. There was no purse, no wallet, and no surviving identification. The body was transported to the Gate Institute in Bergen for an autopsy. The lead medical examiner was confronted with a baffling set of medical paradoxes. First, the fire. The burns were extensive, but they were largely confined to the front of her body. The fire had been incredibly hot, fueled by the gasoline found in the plastic bottles. Second, the toxicology report. The coroner found between 50 and 70 phenamyl sleeping pills in her stomach. Many of them had not completely absorbed into her bloodstream before she died. Furthermore, there was a high concentration of carbon monoxide in her blood and soot in her lungs. This meant she was alive and breathing when she was set on fire. And then came the final, physical anomaly. There was an unexplained bruise on the right side of her neck, consistent with a blow or a sudden fall, though it was not the cause of death. The official cause of death was ruled as a combination of incapacitation by phenamol, sleeping pills, and fatal carbon monoxide poisoning from the fire. But the Bergen Police Department was divided. The official ruling leaned towards a highly elaborate, agonizing suicide, but experienced detectives looked at the scraped labels, the burnt passport, and the remote location and saw the unmistakable signature of a professional assassination who commits suicide by hiking into a freezing rocky ravine, swallowing a massive handful of pills, dousing themselves in gasoline, and setting themselves on fire. And why cut the tags out of your underwear before you do it?
Chapter 2. The Suitcases at the Station.
With no fingerprints on file and no missing persons reports matching her description, the woman in the ice was a complete phantom. But on December 2nd, just 3 days after the discovery of the body, the Bergen police caught their first major break. They were contacted by the staff at the Bergen railway station. 2 suitcases had been deposited in the station's left luggage lockers on November 23rd, 6 days before the body was found. The rental period had expired, and the bags had not been claimed. When detectives opened the lockers and pulled out the suitcases, they found a fingerprint that perfectly matched the corpse in the Isdal Valley. They had found her luggage. But if the police thought the suitcases would provide simple answers, they were dead wrong. The contents of the luggage only plunged the investigation deeper into the murky, paranoid world of 1970s Cold War espionage. Detectives opened the suitcases on a large table at headquarters. They inventoried the contents with growing disbelief. Inside the luggage they found several pairs of non-prescription glasses with different frames, multiple high-quality wigs of varying hair colors, clothing and dresses, but just like the items in the valley, almost every single manufacturer label had been snipped out. A tube of eczema cream, but the doctor's name and the date of prescription had been painstakingly scraped off the metal tube. Norwegian, Swiss, Belgian, and British currency. Cosmetics, hairbrushes, and a few silver spoons that matched the one found at the crime scene. But hidden among the mundane travel items was something that immediately triggered the involvement of the Norwegian intelligence service, POT. It was a small black notepad. When detectives opened the notepad, they didn't find a diary or phone numbers. They found columns of neatly written alphanumeric codes, 130N13, 131M15, 1411R18. This wasn't shorthand. It was military-style encryption. The police handed the notepad over to military cryptographers. It took them days to crack the cipher, but when they did, the codes revealed a meticulous, sprawling travel itinerary. The letters and numbers corresponded to dates and places. The codes proved that the Isdal woman had been traveling obsessively across Europe for months. She had visited Paris, Hamburg, Geneva, Oslo, Stavanger, Trondheim, and Bergen. But how did she cross so many international borders without drawing attention? By tracing her movements through the decrypted notepad, police began checking hotel registries across Norway. They discovered that the woman had checked into multiple hotels, but she never used the same name twice. She was Fenella Lork from Belgium. She was Claudia Tielt from Brussels. She was Elisabeth Lienhauers from Ostend. She was Vera Schlosseneck. She was Alexia Zarne-Mercher. In total, the police uncovered 8 distinct, fully documented fake identities. Each identity was supported by a forged passport. Each time she checked into a hotel, she used a different name, a different passport, and often wore a different wig and glasses. She wasn't a tourist. She was an operative. But who was she working for? The KGB, the Israeli Mossad, the CIA? And what was she doing in the quiet coastal cities of Norway in the winter of 1970?
Bryan Midnight and Art Midnight know these deep dives are massive. If you're busy right now, you can just click or tap the save button so you can listen or watch to it later, or you click download if you're using a mobile or a smartphone and going somewhere that has no internet or mobile data. And hey, please take a second to hit that like button, subscribe to Midnight Ledger Audio, and watch our other videos if you're into this kind of content. Don't forget to ding the notification bell because chances are, if you don't, these kind of videos won't pop up into your feeds. Alright, let's get back to the ledger. Chapter 3. The Chameleon of Room 426.
With the encrypted notepad cracked and the 8 forged passports identified, the Bergen police and the Norwegian intelligence service began retracing the phantom steps. What they discovered was a woman gripped by intense, consuming paranoia. Let us look at her final days in Bergen. On November 18, 1970, she checked into the Hotel Horteheimen. She used the alias Elisabeth Lienhauers and claimed to be a Belgian citizen. The hotel staff remembered her vividly. She was striking but hard to define. She had wide hips, dark hair, and a pronounced gap between her two front teeth. She smelled strongly of garlic and exotic spices, a scent that lingered in the hallways long after she passed. But it wasn't her appearance that unnerved the staff, it was her behavior. She demanded a room with a balcony, but flatly refused any room on the ground floor. She was terrified of being easily accessible from the street. During her brief stay at the Hordeheimen, she constantly requested to change rooms. At one point, she moved 3 times in a single week. This is a classic counter-surveillance tactic, designed to prevent anyone from setting up listening devices or establishing a line of sight into the room. When she was in her room, she rarely left. Staff noted that she would drag a heavy armchair to the door, wedging it against the handle to barricade herself inside. When she did interact with the staff, she spoke a strange, broken English, heavily accented with German and French. If asked about her profession, she offered a perfectly rehearsed cover story. She was a traveling antiquities dealer, traveling across Europe to purchase rare furniture and art. But an antiquities dealer does not exhibit the behavior of a hunted spy. Witnesses at the various hotels she stayed at across Norway reported strange, silent interactions. She was frequently seen sitting alone in hotel dining rooms, observing the entrances. One chambermaid reported walking into the woman's room to clean, only to find the Isdal woman sitting on the bed, staring blankly at the wall. When the maid entered, the woman snapped out of her trance, quickly shoved a piece of paper into a drawer, and demanded the maid leave. But the most chilling encounter occurred in the lounge of the Hotel Neptune, just days before her death. A witness observed the Isdal woman sitting in the hotel lobby. A man described as heavily built with foreign features approached her table. He didn't sit down. He simply leaned over and whispered something in German. The Isdal woman's face went pale. She looked up at the man and replied with a single word. "Nine, no." The man nodded, turned on his heel, and walked out of the hotel. He was never identified. Was this her handler? Was it an enemy operative delivering a final ultimatum? The police could not say. But they knew that a woman moving with 8 passports and military-grade encryption was not in Norway to buy antique chairs. She was there to watch something, and the Norwegian military was terrified that she had succeeded.
Chapter 4. The Penguin Missiles.
To understand the geopolitical stakes of the Isdal Woman Mystery, we must zoom out and look at the map of Europe in 1970. The Cold War was at its absolute freezing point. Norway occupied a uniquely precarious position. It was a founding member of NATO, but it shared a direct, highly sensitive northern border with the Soviet Union. Norway's deep, winding fjords and coastal waters were the ultimate strategic battleground. If the Soviet Navy wanted to break out into the North Atlantic, they had to go through Norwegian waters. Because of this, the Norwegian military was constantly developing and testing top-secret naval weaponry to defend its coastline. When intelligence officers cross-referenced the Isdal woman's decrypted travel itinerary with classified military schedules, the blood drained from their faces. Her movements across Norway, to Stavanger, Trondheim, and Bergen, aligned perfectly with the highly classified field tests of a devastating new weapon, the Penguin anti-ship missile. The Penguin missile was a game-changer. It was the first Western anti-ship missile with an advanced passive infrared seeker. It could be fired from a patrol boat or a helicopter, skim the surface of the ocean, and strike a Soviet warship with devastating precision without giving away the shooter's position. It was the crown jewel of Norwegian defense technology in the 1970s, and the Isdal woman seemed to be following it. Witnesses placed her in Stavanger at the exact time the military was conducting naval trials in the nearby fjords. A fisherman in the area reported seeing a woman matching her description, standing on a secluded coastal road, using high-powered binoculars to watch the military patrol boats maneuver in the distance. Even more alarming, a Norwegian naval officer later came forward to the police. He reported that while he was staying at a hotel in Bergen, a woman with dark hair and a gap in her teeth approached him in the dining room. She was incredibly charismatic. She asked probing, intelligent questions about his work, the local geography, and the naval bases in the area. When the officer saw the composite sketch of the Isdal woman in the newspaper weeks later, he immediately recognized her as the woman from the dining room. The Norwegian intelligence service, POT, effectively took over the shadow aspects of the investigation. The local Bergen police were left to handle the crime scene, but the espionage angles were quickly classified and buried. If she was a spy observing the Penguin missile tests, who was she working for? The obvious answer in 1970 was the KGB. The Soviet Union had a desperate need to understand NATO's anti-ship capabilities, but the KGB was highly regimented. They rarely used single, unattached female operatives to conduct field surveillance in hostile NATO territory without a deep, structured support network. Some intelligence historians have proposed an alternative, far more controversial theory. What if she wasn't Soviet? What if she was Israeli? In the late 1960s and early 1970s, the Mossad was conducting aggressive clandestine operations across Europe, hunting down former Nazi war criminals and monitoring the sale of advanced European weaponry to Arab states. The Isdal woman's dark hair, wide hips, and the specific cadence of her accents led some profilers to suggest she may have been an Israeli operative, perhaps tracking a different target entirely, and her presence near the military bases was simply a coincidence. But a coincidence does not explain the 8 passports. It does not explain the encryption. And it certainly doesn't explain why someone forced her into the valley of death, pumped her stomach full of sleeping pills, and set her on fire. By December of 1970, the police had hit a massive, impenetrable wall. The tags were gone. The fingerprints yielded no matches in Interpol databases. The dental records, which showed unique, gold-filling dental work practically unseen in Scandinavia, but common in Eastern Europe or South America, led to dead ends. She was a ghost, and the Norwegian government was running out of time to bury her.
Bryan Midnight and Art Midnight know these deep dives are massive. If you're busy right now, you can just click or tap the save button so you can listen or watch to it later. Or you click download if you're using a smartphone and going somewhere that has no internet or mobile data. And hey, please take a second to hit that like button, subscribe to Midnight Ledger Audio, and watch our other videos if you're into this kind of content. Don't forget to ding the notification bell, because chances are, if you don't, these kind of videos won't pop up into your feeds. All right, let's get back to the ledger. Chapter 5. The Rubber Boots and the Men in Black.
When a phantom strips away every label from their clothing, they are challenging the police to a forensic game of cat and mouse. They are betting that their tracks are entirely erased, but no one is perfect, and the Isdal woman made one fatal mistake. While almost every tag, brand name, and identifying mark had been violently scraped or cut away from her belongings, the detectives examining the ashes in the Valley of Death found something that survived the inferno. Beside her charred body sat a pair of rubber boots. They were practical, designed for the harsh Norwegian winter. But more importantly, the manufacturer's mark was still faintly visible on the rubber sole. The Bergen police immediately circulated the description of the boots to shoe stores across the country. Within days, they got a hit. A shop assistant at the Oscar Rortvedt shoe store in the coastal city of Stavanger contacted the authorities. The assistant vividly remembered selling that exact pair of rubber boots. The customer was a striking woman with dark hair, wide hips, and a gap between her front teeth. She spoke broken English and took a long time selecting the boots. This was a massive breakthrough. By confirming she bought the boots in Stavanger, the police cross-referenced her coded notepad and hotel logs. They proved she was in Stavanger during the exact same window that the Norwegian military was conducting the highly classified Penguin anti-ship missile tests. But the boots were just a physical tether. The most terrifying piece of evidence came from a human witness. Decades after the case was officially closed, a 26-year-old local man finally came forward with a story that the Bergen police had desperately tried to bury in 1970. 5 days before the charred body was found, this young man was hiking near the Isdalen Valley. The weather was miserable. As he walked down a narrow trail, he saw a woman walking toward him. It was the Isdal woman, but she wasn't alone. Flanking her, a few paces behind, were 2 men. The hiker described them as wearing dark coats with Southern European features. As the woman passed the hiker, their eyes locked. According to his account, her face was a mask of absolute paralyzing terror. She opened her mouth, her eyes pleading, as if she was about to speak, to scream, to beg for help. But she didn't. She looked back at the 2 men, swallowed her words, and continued walking into the Valley of Death. When the news broke about the burned body, the hiker immediately went to the Bergen police station. He sat down with a detective and recounted the terrifying encounter on the trail. He described the woman. He described the 2 men in dark coats. The detective's response: forget her. She was dispatched. The case will never be solved. The police actively suppressed the sighting. They told the young man to go home and keep his mouth shut. Why? Because the Bergen police were under immense pressure from the Norwegian intelligence service, the POT, to wrap up the investigation as quickly and quietly as possible. A spy assassination on NATO soil during the height of the Cold War was a geopolitical nightmare. The government needed the problem to disappear, and so they orchestrated one of the most unbelievable cover-ups in European history.
Chapter 6. the zinc-lined coffin.
Just 3 weeks after the charred remains were discovered in the valley, the chief of the Bergen police convened a press conference. The room was packed with journalists. The public was terrified. The rumors of Soviet spies, Israeli assassins, and secret military codes had dominated the headlines. The people wanted answers. The police chief stepped up to the microphones and delivered the official conclusion of the state. The Isdal woman, he declared, had committed suicide. A collective gasp echoed through the press room. Suicide? The official narrative stated that the woman had hiked into a freezing rocky ravine alone. She had swallowed a lethal dose of phenomol sleeping pills. Then, before losing consciousness, she doused her own body in gasoline, lit a match, and burned herself alive. The journalists were stunned. What about the 8 forged passports? What about the military-grade encryption? What about the carefully scraped labels, the multiple wigs, and the men in dark coats? The police offered no explanation. They claimed she was a deeply disturbed, paranoid woman who suffered from mental illness and chose a highly elaborate, agonizing way to end her own life. The espionage angle was officially dismissed. The case was closed, but even the police didn't entirely believe their own story. Because of the way they buried her. In February 1971, the Isdal woman was laid to rest at the Mölndal Cemetery in Bergen. It was a bitterly cold day. 8 members of the Bergen Police Department served as the pallbearers. No family was present, no friends, no handler. Among her belongings, investigators had found a small Catholic rosary. Because of this, a Catholic priest was brought in to perform a brief, solemn service over the casket. But it wasn't a standard wooden casket. The Norwegian authorities ordered that her remains be placed inside a custom-built zinc-lined coffin. A zinc-lined coffin is hermetically sealed. It prevents decomposition and is typically used when a body needs to be preserved for international transport at a later date. The police were hedging their bets. They buried her in an unmarked grave, but they sealed her in zinc because they knew, deep down, that one day, perhaps decades later, her true identity would be uncovered, and a foreign government or a grieving family would come looking for her. They lowered the zinc coffin into the frozen earth. The grave was filled. The files were boxed up and placed deep in the archives of the Norwegian intelligence services. For nearly 50 years, the Isdal woman slept in the dark. The Valley of Death kept its secret. The Cold War ended. The Soviet Union collapsed. The Berlin Wall fell. But in the 21st century, forensic science achieved miracles that the 1970s detectives could never have imagined. DNA profiling, isotope analysis, global biometric databases. The grave at Mölndal Cemetery was about to be disturbed, and the ghost of room 426 was finally going to speak.
Bryan Midnight and Art Midnight know these deep dives are massive. If you are busy right now, you can just click or tap the save button so you can listen or watch to it later, or you click download if you are using a smartphone and going somewhere that has no internet or mobile data. And hey, please take a second to hit that like button, subscribe to Midnight Ledger Audio, and watch our other videos if you are into this kind of content. Don't forget to ding the notification bell, because chances are if you don't, these kind of videos won't pop up into your feeds. All right, let's get back to the ledger. Chapter 7. The Jawbone in the Archives.
For 46 years, the Isdal woman was a cold case. A ghost story traded by Bergen locals and retired police officers. The zinc-lined coffin in the Mölndal Cemetery remained undisturbed beneath the Norwegian frost. But in 2016, a team of investigative journalists from the Norwegian Broadcasting Corporation, NRK, and the BBC decided to pry the ledger back open. They wanted to apply 21st century forensic science to a 20th century phantom. They petitioned the police to exhume the body to extract DNA. But during their investigation, they discovered something shocking. They didn't need to dig up the grave. Because the body in the cemetery wasn't whole back in 1970, before the body was placed in the zinc coffin, the forensic pathologist at Haukeland University Hospital had removed the Isdal woman's jawbone. He also took vital tissue samples from her organs. Because her dental work was so utterly unique, featuring specific gold foil fillings and crowns that were completely foreign to Scandinavia, the doctor kept the jawbone in the hospital's forensic archives, hoping someone might eventually recognize the dental records. For nearly half a century, the jawbone sat in a dusty, forgotten cardboard box in the basement of the hospital. When the journalists and modern investigators found it, they realized they were holding the holy grail of forensic science. In 1970, a jawbone was just a piece of bone. In 2016, it was a biological hard drive, packed with data waiting to be decoded. The investigators immediately handed the jawbone and the tissue samples over to the Norwegian Criminal Investigation Service, the Kripos. They were going to do what the 1970 detectives couldn't. They were going to sequence her DNA, and they were going to map the chemical signature of her childhood. The DNA results came back first. They confirmed she was of European descent, but DNA only tells you who your ancestors are. It doesn't tell you where you lived, to find out where the Isdal woman came from. Scientists had to look at the very enamel of her teeth. They used a cutting-edge technique called isotope analysis. When you're a child, the water you drink and the food you eat contain specific chemical isotopes, specifically strontium and oxygen. These isotopes are tied to the exact geology of the region where you live. As your adult teeth form in your jaw, they lock in those isotopes, creating a permanent chemical map of your childhood environment. The scientists extracted the enamel from the Isdal woman's teeth. They placed it in a mass spectrometer. They waited for the machine to read the isotopic map. When the results came back, the phantom finally had an origin story.
Chapter 8. The Map in the Enamel.
The isotope analysis destroyed the 1970 police profile completely. First, the teeth revealed her age. The police originally estimated she was around 30 years old when she died in the valley. But the enamel told a different story. She was older, much older. The scientists concluded she was born around the year 1930. She was approximately 40 years old when her life ended in the flames. Why is that birth year so crucial? Because it places her childhood directly in the crosshairs of the most catastrophic event in modern human history. A girl born in Europe in 1930 would have been 9 years old when Adolf Hitler invaded Poland, igniting the Second World War. Her formative years would have been entirely shaped by bombings, displacement, occupation, and the brutal theater of war. But where exactly was she? The strontium and oxygen isotopes pinpointed her birthplace with terrifying accuracy. The chemical signature in her teeth perfectly matched the geography of Nuremberg, Germany. But the isotopes also showed a shift. As she grew older, the signature changed, indicating she moved during her early childhood. She migrated westward, settling near the border of Germany and France, likely the Alsace region or closer to the French border. This geographic profile was the missing key. Suddenly, the bizarre details of her behavior in 1970 began to make perfect sense. Remember the hotel clerks in Bergen? They noted that she spoke a strange, broken English heavily accented with German and French. The isotope analysis proved that she grew up exactly where those two languages collide. Furthermore, modern handwriting experts analyzed her encrypted notepad and the hotel registration forms she filled out under her fake identities. They noticed the specific way she wrote the number 1 and the number 7 with a distinct crossbar. It was a uniquely francophone style of writing, taught primarily in French and Belgian schools during the 1930s and 40s. She was a child of the borderlands, a woman whose early life was likely shattered by the Second World War. Intelligence historians look at this profile and see the absolute perfect candidate for Cold War espionage recruitment. Intelligence agencies, whether the KGB, the Mossad, or Western intelligence, frequently recruited individuals who were displaced by the war. People without deep family ties, people who were fluent in multiple European languages, people who knew how to survive in the shadows because they had been doing it since they were children. The jawbone proved she was real. It proved she was German-born, raised near France, and deeply embedded in the espionage networks of the 1970s. But it still didn't answer the ultimate, horrifying question. Who were the two men in dark coats? And why did her journey end with a belly full of sleeping pills and a match in the Valley of Death?
Bryan Midnight and Art Midnight know these deep dives are massive. If you're busy right now, you can just click or tap the save button so you can listen or watch to it later. Or you click download if you're using a smartphone and going somewhere that has no internet or mobile data. And hey, please take a second to hit that like button, subscribe to Midnight Ledger Audio, and watch our other videos if you're into this kind of content. Don't forget to ding the notification bell, because chances are, if you don't, these kind of videos won't pop up into your feeds. Alright, let's get back to the ledger. Chapter 9. The 3 Theories of the Flame.
With the DNA extracted and the geographic origins mapped, we are left standing at the edge of the Isdalen ravine. We know where she came from. We know how she died. But why did she burn? To close this ledger, we must examine the 3 dominant theories that have consumed intelligence analysts, historians, and true crime investigators for over half a century. We will present the evidence for each. You must decide which phantom you believe in. This was the immediate, terrifying assumption of the Norwegian military in 1970. The Cold War was raging. Norway was testing the Penguin anti-ship missile, a weapon designed specifically to destroy the Soviet Navy. The Isdal Woman's travel itinerary across Norway aligned perfectly with the classified testing schedules of this weapon. She was seen in Stavanger and Trondheim using binoculars to observe military movements. She was caught interrogating a Norwegian naval officer in a hotel dining room. Her encrypted notepad, the 8 forged passports, and the meticulous removal of every single identifying label point to state-sponsored espionage training. The KGB was notorious for operating vast, complex networks of illegals, spies operating under deep cover without diplomatic immunity. If she was a Soviet spy, why was she killed? Perhaps she was compromised. Perhaps the Norwegian intelligence service, POT, discovered her, and her Soviet handlers decided to eliminate her before she could be captured and interrogated by NATO. The brutal, theatrical nature of her death, forced to swallow pills and burned alive in a remote valley, could have been a message from Moscow to other operatives: fail and we will erase you. But the KGB rarely used lone female operatives for frontline military surveillance without a massive support network, and her dental work, the unique gold foil fillings, was practically unheard of in the Soviet Union. Which brings us to the second, far more controversial theory. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, the Israeli intelligence agency, the Mossad, was waging a shadow war across Europe. Their targets were twofold: escaped Nazi war criminals and European scientists who were helping Arab states develop advanced weaponry. In 1973, just 3 years after the Isdal woman's death, a team of Mossad agents infamously botched an assassination in Lillehammer, Norway, killing an innocent Moroccan waiter they mistook for a Palestinian terrorist. The Lillehammer affair proved conclusively that Israeli hit squads were operating freely on Norwegian soil. Could the Isdal woman have been part of an earlier Israeli operation? Proponents of this theory point to her physical description: dark hair, wide hips, and the specific cadence of her linguistic accents, which fit the profile of Israeli operatives deployed during that era. If she was hunting a Nazi war criminal hiding in Scandinavia, her erratic behavior, her terror of the ground floor, and her frantic changing of hotel rooms suddenly make sense. She wasn't watching the Penguin missiles. She was tracking a human target, and she realized the target was tracking her when she met the unidentified man in the Hotel Neptune, the man who whispered in German, to whom she replied, 9. Was she refusing an order from a handler or confronting an enemy? If she was killed by an opposing intelligence agency, or even silenced by her own, the Valley of Death was the perfect place to hide the body. But there is a third theory, a theory that strips away the glamour of the Cold War and replaces it with the cold, hard reality of international crime.
Chapter 10. The Check-Kidding Ring.
What if she wasn't a spy at all? In 1970, before the era of digital banking, international finance relied heavily on paper checks and traveler's checks. A massive, sophisticated criminal enterprise known as check-kiting swept across Europe. Organized crime syndicates would use highly skilled forgers and mules to travel rapidly across international borders. These mules would open bank accounts under fake names, deposit forged or stolen checks, and then immediately withdraw the cash before the international banks could communicate with each other and realize the checks were worthless. It was a highly lucrative, highly dangerous game, and the Isdal woman fit the profile of a high-level mule perfectly. Look at her luggage. Inside the lockers at the Bergen train station, police found Norwegian kroner, Swiss francs, Belgian francs, and British pounds. She had 8 forged passports, the exact tools needed to open fraudulent bank accounts across multiple countries. Her travel itinerary, bouncing frantically from Paris to Hamburg to Oslo to Bergen, mirrors the frenetic pace of a check-kiter trying to outrun the banking system's clearing process. Her paranoia? She wasn't afraid of the KGB, she was afraid of the mafia or the police. When she dragged an armchair against her hotel door, it wasn't counter-espionage, it was the sheer terror of a criminal who knew her syndicate was coming to silence her because she knew too much or because she had stolen from them. The 2 men in dark coats seen following her into the Isdalen Valley. They weren't intelligence officers, they were enforcers. The mafia kills to send a message, forcing a woman to swallow pills and burning her body to destroy the evidence, is a brutal underworld execution. But check-kiters do not usually carry military-grade, alphanumeric encryption pads. They do not usually scrape the labels off their eczema cream, and they certainly do not spend their days observing classified naval missile tests with high-powered binoculars. The espionage theories hold the high ground. The sheer level of operational security she maintained, the wigs, the non-prescription glasses, the meticulously sanitized crime scene, requires state-sponsored training. The Norwegian intelligence service, POT, knew this. That is why they classified the files. That is why they told the hiker to go home and forget the men in the dark coats. That is why they buried her in a zinc-lined coffin, because they knew exactly what she was. They just couldn't publicly admit it without triggering an international diplomatic crisis.
Bryan and Art Midnight know these deep dives are massive. If you're busy right now, you can just click or tap the save button so you can listen or watch to it later, or you click download if you're using a smartphone and going somewhere that has no internet or mobile data. And hey, please take a second to hit that like button, subscribe to Midnight Ledger Audio, and watch our other videos if you're into this kind of content. Don't forget to ding the notification bell because chances are, if you don't, these kind of videos won't pop up into your feeds. All right, let's get back to the ledger. Chapter 11. The Valley Keeps Its Secret.
56 years have passed since the professor and his daughters smelled the smoke in the Valley of Death. The Isdal woman's DNA is now mapped. We know she was born near Nuremberg around 1930. We know she spent her childhood near the French border. We know her handwriting, her dental work, and the exact chemical signature of the water she drank as a little girl. But we still do not know her name. She remains the ultimate casualty of the Cold War. A woman who stripped away her own identity so thoroughly that not even 21st century science can fully rebuild it. Was she a Soviet spy, betrayed and burned by her own handlers? Was she an Israeli assassin hunting monsters in the snow, or was she a terrified criminal who simply ran out of places to hide? The truth is buried somewhere in the classified archives of European intelligence agencies. Until those files are opened, the ghost of room 426 will continue to wander the rocky slopes of Mount Ulriken. The next time you check into a hotel, look at the person sitting quietly in the corner of the lobby. Notice if they are wearing a wig. Notice if they are watching the door. Because history tells us that the shadows are full of phantoms, and sometimes they never leave. You have reached the end of the archive. This concludes our exhaustive, feature-length investigation into the mystery of the Isdal woman. Midnight Ledger Audio presents these massive documentaries because we believe the true history of our world is written in the shadows, and those shadows deserve the brightest lights. This documentary was narrated by Art Midnight, and the countless hours of historical research, geopolitical tracking, and forensic reconstruction were conducted by Bryan Midnight. Now, I want to hear from you. Turn to the comments and tell us, which theory do you believe? Was she KGB, Mossad, or a high-level criminal mule? And who were the two men in the dark coats? And hey, please take a second to hit that like button, subscribe to Midnight Ledger Audio, and watch our other videos if you're into this kind of content. Don't forget to ding the notification bell, because chances are if you don't, these kind of videos won't pop up into your feeds. Keep the ledger open, stay vigilant, and we will see you in the next archive.